Cool. All right, good afternoon. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Wednesday, October the 19th, 2022. The time is 4:36 Central Time, and I am joined by my dear friend, Alli, the penultimate abolitionist, Sullivan. The hammer, the abolition hammer, Sullivan. Someone whose heart is bottomless, someone whose soul is endless. I could go on, but I am so thankful for Alli in my life and her friendship. And we are gathering today to talk about her work on death row. Now, you can tell from looking at her, she's one of these crazy death penalty people that, just gushes over death row and all this kind of stuff. In fact, I think she's probably gonna get, hooked up with 2 or 3, 4 or 5 different folk on death row, and I'm just playing. She is wonderful, and she is not crazy. She is someone who is, about the work. She's down with the work, and she's trying to make a difference. So, without further ado, Alli Sullivan, I had a question for you. So, tell me this: how does one get involved in this work? How does one become, not just an activist? I mean, you're more than an activist. I mean, you're writing people all the time, talking on the phone to people all the time. How did you get involved in this work?
So my process of getting involved in the work spans probably close to a year. I'm an anthropology major. I've always wanted to study anthropology, social anthropology in particular. And so I've always been vocal about various social issues, but it wasn't until everything went down with George Floyd that kind of forced me to, not forced me, but I guess it introduced me to not just sitting around and talking about social issues, but actually getting involved in them and
putting your feet in the streets.
Exactly. I was in the streets all the time during the George Floyd protests in Portland. And if you saw anything about the Portland protests, they were particularly wild.
Right.
And I was going multiple times a week for months straight. And after going for so long, I not only came to the realization that Portland protests were very performative, and it really annoyed me because I'm like, yes, we could be stomping in the streets and screaming, but it felt like nobody was doing anything more than that. That's where it ended.
So you were searching for meaning, something real.
Exactly. And I was also really frustrated that in the face of an execution that happened in broad daylight, nobody was talking about the executions that happened behind closed doors in secrecy. And I felt that was really important to talk about. Because nobody's talking about them. There's a ton of people screaming about police brutality, but what about being strapped to a gurney and killed without anyone like paying attention? So fast forward a couple months after George Floyd, I got my first wind of the federal execution spree that was happening. And this was, by the time I had learned about it, we were already on the 4th person. His name was Lesmond Mitchell. He was a Navajo man who killed another Navajo person on Navajo territory. And I read that because the article that I saw on Facebook, it was the Navajo Nation's chief calling out the federal government for going against Navajo practices and executing somebody for a crime that didn't even happen on federal territory.
Right.
And it's not like the person that he killed was an American citizen either. They were a Navajo person. So
both a US citizen and a Navajo person, that it would have taken place, and that's the thing that people, don't understand about these situations, is that these reservations, these territories, are sovereign nations. I mean, that doesn't mean, obviously, it doesn't mean that they're not a U.S. citizen, but it also means that they are also a Navajo citizen, and Navajo people should have control over what happens on Navajo land, the criminal justice system on Navajo land. So, yeah, I too was particularly bothered by that situation.
Yeah, and then, but even after I saw what was happening, I still didn't totally spring into action. I just was kind of paying attention to it a little bit more.
Right.
But by the time we got around to Brandon Bernard, who I believe was the 8th person in line to be executed in the last few months of the Trump administration, I came across the Instagram page Help Save Brandon. I had seen people talking about him. Sean King, Kim Kardashian. I had seen his name floating around.
The regulars.
The regulars. I had seen his name floating around Instagram, and I saw photos of him. I was seeing videos that they were able to take of him. And what was apparent to me at first, like right from the beginning, was just how gentle and kind of a person he was. I'm not saying that he was innocent, but at least the person we saw in 2020 that they were executing was an extremely gentle, kind, sweet person who had the most lovely smile, who loved to crochet. And that was the first execution that I followed really closely. And after that execution had taken place, I literally sat in my mom's car for 4 hours sobbing because I didn't want her to think I was crazy.
What did you have? You had contact with him. Did you write him or anything like that?
No, I did not write Brandon, but Brandon is the reason I started writing.
Got you. No, I understand that. We could go on for a while comparing stories, but I too, Troy Davis was that moment for me that drew me into the movement. I guess literally about 10 years prior. And so, it speaks to like the generational differences between you and I, but it is interesting how these cases draw us in and prick our hearts and cause us to move and to learn and to go deeper into other cases. But go ahead, sorry.
No, you're good. No, I just became almost like not obsessed with Brandon Bernard's case, but I was checking for updates and reading all the legal stuff. Like that was the first case I had followed really closely, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day.
Right.
The remaining 2-ish weeks before his execution. And after the execution proceeded, like I said, I had sat in my mom's car for like 4 hours sobbing because I just couldn't believe that we would extinguish somebody's life who, in my eyes, did everything possible to build from and change himself from the person who committed the crime when he was barely 18 years old, decades prior. And so I didn't write to Brandon, but after Brandon's execution, first I attended his funeral online. They live streamed it, and I was just a mess. His aunt was talking about witnessing it, and it was just awful. But the funeral was lovely, but what they were discussing was
no, I
awful.
understand.
And from there on, I realized that they had still 3 more executions in line because there was a man who was executed the very next day after Brandon. I didn't hear about him until after the fact because all the attention was on Brandon. But then I'm like, oh, there's still 3 more people that are part of the federal spree. So, by this point, I had heard the names Julius Jones. I had heard the name Rodney Reed. So I decided to send holiday cards out to Rodney Reed on Texas death row, Julius Jones, who was on Oklahoma's death row, Dustin Higgs, who was on federal death row, and Billy Allen, who still is on federal death row, proclaiming his innocence. And that's when I first reached out because I knew I couldn't single-handedly change everything, But I just felt like in the wake of Brandon's execution, I would imagine prison to be an extremely lonely and isolating place. So I'm like, even if I can't change everything, I just wanted to reach out and just let them know, if people haven't been telling them, just let them know that people care about them and people are paying attention. And
That's because you got that bottomless heart that I was speaking of. So let me jump in right there. When you were writing these guys, when you first started writing, in that moment, were you like, oh my gosh, like what is it like were you apprehensive, or like were you scared as to what was going to happen, or what were your thoughts?
I don't know that I was apprehensive or scared. I just was like, I have to do this. Like, I have
Right.
to. Nobody can stop me. I just was set on it and I had to do it. And at first, baby abolitionist Alli, knowing nothing about how prisons work and how mail works in prisons, I sent cards out to some of these people. And like my card that went to Texas death row for Rodney Reed, I got my red envelope back in the mail and it says return to sender. And then they put a sticker on it and everything. And then I also tried sending like a care package. Again, baby abolitionist Alli, not knowing that
Right.
you're not allowed to send care packages. I mean, it seems like so intuitive now, but then it wasn't. And so I was not apprehensive. I don't know that I was excited, just because at that point, one of the guys, Dustin Higgs, had a pending execution date. I reached out to them mid to late December of 2020, and Dustin Higgs's execution date was on January 15th. So I mean, maybe I was a little apprehensive. I wanted to hear back from Dustin, but not, I mean, not for like a self-serving personal reason, but just because, like, I don't know, I just felt like I had to reach out to them.
Right.
And then as soon as that happened, I actually end up getting a letter back from Dustin Higgs 3 days after his execution date. And he was so hopeful in this letter. This letter had taken almost 3 weeks to get to me because it was in the height of Christmas and all of the holidays. So he had sent this letter like the day after Christmas, and I didn't get it until 3 days after he was executed. And Dustin was so hopeful in it. He was talking and different things he wanted to talk to me about, and that he was excited to get to know me more and all these kinds of things. And reading that 3 days after his execution was just so heartbreaking,
Of
because
course.
there's like, he was still so hopeful in this moment, and like it was already over, and but you could feel that hope in his letter. And after I got that letter, I just kind of went crazy and literally wrote to anybody and everybody whose name I came across: death row, not death row, innocent, guilty. Like, I was
And this would have
sending
been
out letters.
this would have been the beginning of 2021. Gotcha.
Yeah, I was just sending out letters left and right: Texas death row, South Carolina death row, Florida death row, Texas not death row, Alabama, Missouri, North Carolina, like
And so those
everywhere.
responses, so 2021 was pretty much filled with people who responded, and you trying to engage with all of these people who responded. How many
Mhm.
people responded?
Well, I guess a better way I can answer this question is, at the height of it, I had about 40 pen pals,
Whew, that's a lot.
because I just kept sending letters out left and right. And like, Dustin was executed, so I didn't connect with him. But and then Rodney Reed never responded, and a couple other people never responded. But I would say a vast majority of them responded, especially people whose cases were were a lot less known.
Uh-huh.
And I think that goes back to this whole thing of like them just wanting companionship and somebody that cares about them. And like when you're somebody who nobody hardly knows about your case, I'm sure there's not a lot of letters flooding your mailbox,
Right, of course.
flooding into your cell, versus if you are, and this is absolutely nothing against Julius Jones, but if you are a Julius Jones of the world, everybody knows, and you are probably going to get a lot more mail than somebody who does not have a similar awareness about the case.
Right. Yeah, so as 2021 goes along and these people start responding, how many of these folks are facing execution? I mean, how many of the folks that you were corresponding with since then have been executed?
So since I started writing people, 5 of my people have been executed, and at least another 5 or 6 were almost executed and could still potentially be executed down the road.
And so let me speak to that real quick. You talked about like the pain of getting this letter back from did you say Dustin Higgs was the
Dustin Higgs.
Dustin
Yeah.
Higgs? Okay. So the letter came to you after he was executed. Then you've had all of these other, 3, 5, 6, whatever executed.
Mhm.
Why not just give up? Why not I mean, it's got to be painful. I mean, you've talked about crying and you've talked about, not being able to interact with people. And, I know that there's grief and depression and all such things that go along with these types of relationships. What's the point? Why not just give up?
I don't give up, because even if we can't save everybody, they still deserve to know that people care about them. They still deserve to be comforted in these moments. And I didn't get into this expecting to save everybody physically. I got into this expecting just to bring them a little bit of comfort and support
Gotcha.
in these final moments. Yes, if we can save people, that is always the goal. But the reality is we cannot save everybody.
Right,
And
of course.
so I just want people to know that they have an ally in me, they have a friend in me. If they need anything, I will do my best to support them.
Right.
Um,
Of course. So, okay, so 2021 you go into 2021 and you've got various executions that you've been engaging, and then 2022 begins, and that's when you went from I guess freelance activist or volunteer activist to being employed doing this work. Um,
yeah.
and so, what was the transition like from going from freelance volunteer to being employed?
So I'm going to scooch back just a little bit,
Okay.
because so I first learned about death penalty action. It was during the very beginning of 2021, around when
So
Dustin
you
Higgs
started
was
so you started getting involved with death penalty action, which you now are employed by
yeah.
early on in 2021.
Yeah, I
And
started getting involved with death penalty action during those last couple federal executions, and they were having the virtual vigils, and I was attending those. I was attending their webinars. I started posting on social media a bunch, tagging them a bunch.
so what drew you to death penalty action and not any other group?
I just found them first, and I really liked what they were doing. Like I said, one of the first things that I saw from them were the virtual vigils, and I really enjoy being in that space together, especially after how I felt with Brandon Bernard
Hmm.
and with Brandon Bernard. I just really I just thought being in community with people that felt similarly and cared about this issue was important. It felt comforting in those moments. So I just started attending their vigils, and I just really liked the programs they were doing. They have the Voices of Experience stuff. And at first, that really got me going, because even though I had my own ideas about the death penalty and I knew it was wrong, I think it just strengthened my passion for it to hear more stories of people who have been directly impacted other than the people who I was corresponding with, because there's so many different perspectives in this work.
Right.
So after I started learning about death penalty action, it was probably late spring, early summer when Abe Bonowitz, the DPA executive director, I think he messaged me on Facebook or something, and he's like, hey, I've been seeing you in similar spheres online. I just wanted to reach out. Would you be like, do you want to volunteer with us? And I'm like, sure. Like, I just said it without even thinking. Because I felt, yes, I was signing all the petitions. Yes, I was making all the phone calls, writing all the letters. Like, I would write letters, very long letters, and send them to literally everybody who could have any say in every execution.
Right.
I think there was one guy, I sent probably 45 letters out to all kinds of people across the country for him on death row. And I sent these like thick packets. I went through like probably 400 stamps because I was sending so many big, thick packets. And so we fast forward to June, and I'm starting to get a little bit more comfortable with DPA. I'm starting to become familiar with their staff and their mission and everything that they do. And so I joined them in South Carolina because somebody who I was corresponding with, Brad Sigmund, was scheduled to be executed by electric chair last June. And so I'm like, would it be crazy if I just met you guys in South Carolina tomorrow? I just feel like I have to be there. And they're like, yeah, no, it's not crazy at all. Like, we have a place for you to stay, da 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 da. And so that, I think, really started my relationship with death penalty action, because here we were in the flesh, not just like messaging on Facebook, you know? And so at first I was doing a little bit of volunteer work with their federal team. However, that kind of shifted gears to me helping with communications and with social media. And it's that side of things, the communications and social media stuff, that we transitioned from volunteer into employee.
So it was pretty seamless.
It was pretty seamless. And the nicest part was I didn't have to keep caregiving.
No,
I rather than like fracturing my attention between school, work, and like death penalty abolition stuff, now it was just school and death penalty abolition stuff.
You were just to make it clear, you were a caregiver, and that was what the job was that you were doing. And now you were able to do the death penalty work as your work instead of doing the caregiving.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make that, I knew what you were talking about. I wanted to make that clear for everyone else. So, you know, I know that you and I met earlier this year. I know the Melissa Lucio campaign was going on, and you know, folks were involved in all kinds of stuff. And I remember the first time that we talked, I remember I was very concerned that too much attention was being paid to Melissa Lucio and not to a lot of these other guys who were on death row. And I really, of course, I didn't know you. I didn't know anything about you. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, attention needs to be being paid to all of these cases because there are other executions coming up. And I remember you telling me that back then that you wanted to give all that you had to all of these cases, you know, no matter what. And I just remember thinking at that time, this is someone who, you know, I'm going to be buddies with. Like, we're going to work. We're going to be friends. And you know, I think that one of the things that I realized in that moment is that you understood that, yeah, there are these campaigns that get a lot of attention, and you know, that's part of the work, but that doesn't mean that we forget about everyone else. And you know, and I think that you have really exemplified that, in that, you know, you are involved with the most and with the least, and with the least and with the most in every different direction. And I've always felt like I could count on you you know, to engage in conversation that really is trying to help everyone. And
Mhm.
so, the last question I'll have, and we're getting close to the end of time, but
Mhm.
the last question I'll ask you is concentrating on all cases, like we do, you and I both do. I'm not talking about death penalty action. I'm talking about us, like being concerned about all cases. Is it too much?
Um, that's hard to answer because in terms of like what it takes out of you, it can very easily become too much and too overwhelming. Um, I still stand by my decisions to do as much as I can for everybody because like I said earlier, there's so many people that don't have any support systems. There's so many people that nobody's paying attention to their case and they're just going to let it slide under the rug, and I just don't think that that's acceptable. I am now trying to find a better balance of taking care of myself and taking care of the people that I
Right.
work with. But I still think we cannot neglect anybody. And I will do as much as I can for as long as I can to help as many as I can.
Right. Well, you know, the guys that I work with, you know, I'm a spiritual advisor for, I always say, if you want me, I am dedicated to being there with you until the end, no matter what that looks like.
Mhm.
Um, and I will say that you, as my friend, I've always known that, you know, I don't have to take that journey alone.
Mhm.
That as I'm, you know, gearing up to make that promise that I'm going to be there until the end, I know that you are somebody who supports me in that work, and I know that vice versa, I support you in that work. So,
Mhm.
anyways, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm thankful for you, Alli Sullivan, the abolition hammer, the hammer against injustice, the bottomless heart, the extenuating soul, on and on and on. But I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for your work, and I'm grateful for the chance to have this conversation. And I'm also grateful for your willingness to you know, share what life has been like in the movement for you, because I think that's so important. Because I think a lot of people feel a lot of these similar emotions,
Mhm.
and you know, have similar struggles, and there's nobody to talk to about it. They feel alone, and
Yeah,
so
it's really hard. Outside of the movement, nobody understands. Like, even talking to my therapist, this is like a completely foreign thing to her because this is
right,
not like a type of trauma. This is not an issue that normally gets a lot of attention.
right,
But it definitely is very traumatizing. And so I'm happy that like we have people like in the movement, at least we can relate to, even if
right,
nobody outside of the movement understands and kind of thinks you're a
right,
little crazy.
right. Well, I tell you this, I tell everybody watching, everybody who sees this, I tell myself this: keep the faith, keep the faith, keep the faith. Love is going to win. We're going to beat this death penalty. We're going to accomplish abolition. And I want you to pay attention to Miss Alli Sullivan, because she is leading the way.
Thank you.